Now create model directory. Then create todo model class. Extend todo class from Magento framework abstract model. Then create construct method. This will be used for resource model object initialization. Let's first create resource model. Extend resource model from abstract db class. Implement construct method. Initialize the table name and column name using init method. Now inside todo model, specify the resource model for init method. Next, create todo collection model. Create collection class. Extend from abstract collection model. Simplify the qualifier name. Now create construct method and initialize todo and resource models. Specify the model name in first parameter and provide resource model in second parameter. Similarly, create task model. Create construct method and initialize the resource model inside. Create task resource model first. Initialize the table name and column name. Now create task collection model. Extend from abstract collection. Now create construct method and initialize the task model and the task resource model. Now go back to task model and specify the resource model name to the init method. Now go ahead and create get-controller class. Implement account interface class. This will make the controller accessible for logged-in customers only. Create request interface property. Then we need JSON serializer property. Simplify qualifier name. Next, create result controller JSON factory instance. Create user context interface property. Now create constructor and initialize all of the properties. First, get ID from parameter. ID is an optional parameter. If it is provided, then we filter result for a particular to-do item. Otherwise, we get the collection of to-do items. Now create to-do management class. This class will be helpful to keep the logic manageable at one place. First, create to-do collection factory property. Then create resource model instance. Next, create to-do model factory property. The model is present under current directory of to-do management, so no need to specify namespace here. Now inject the dependencies through constructor and initialize the properties. Create a method get-to-do-items which should accept customer ID and item ID parameters. Item ID is an optional parameter. The return type is gonna be an array. Create collection instance. If item ID is not null, then apply filter to entity ID column. Apply customer ID filter and specify customer ID parameter to it. Convert the return rows to array and return them. Now open view directory, web, and then JS, and create action directory. Then create send get request JS file. We will use this file to send get request to server. This action file will simplify things for us, including fixing code repetition. Return is as a function which accepts service URL and default object as parameters. We will discuss the default object in a bit. Add main story dependency. This dependency will be used to perform the AJAX request. We will return mail stored current instance. This will be useful later on. Let's call the get method and provide service URL in first parameter and false in second parameter. The second parameter allows a global setting when set to true, and we don't need that. Next in chain we have done method on success and fail on request failure. Now let's add screen loader, which should be shown when AJAX request is in progress. We will copy full screen loader JS model file from checkout module. We will keep rest of content similar except changing the container ID. So that is why we need to copy this file. Now paste the file inside model folder and rename it to screenloader.js. Change container ID to km-todo. km-todo is the todo component of parent ID, which comes from a todo PHTML template file. Now let's go ahead and add front-end error processor JS model. We will copy this file from checkout module as well. So copy the file and paste inside model.js directory. Now let's make some changes accordingly. We don't need message container parameter, so let's remove that and replace message container variable with the global message list everywhere in the file. Now add underscore dependency. Add an additional condition to if statement using OR operator. And proceed if response parameter is not an object. Now open send get request action.js file and begin adding the required dependencies. First add screen loader dependency. And then add error processor dependency. Before sending the request, let's start the loader first. Now let's add some logic to the done method. If default object is not undefined, then resolve it and pass response as parameter. And then stop the screen loader. Now let's make changes inside the fail method. process error using process function from error processor, and pass response object has an argument. If deferred object is not undefined, then call reject function, and pass response object has parameter. And finally stop the loader. To forcefully stop, pass 1 as an argument to stop loader function. Now go ahead and create get-todos action.js file. We will use this file to prepare the request and fetch response using send-get-request action. This should return a function which accepts entity ID and deferred object as parameters. First of all, create path todo/index/get. If entity ID is not undefined and is not empty, then concatenate it with the path /id/, then concatenate with the entity ID. To prepare the URL to the route, we need to first add a main URL dependency. Now create service URL using build method from main URL and passing route path as parameter to it. Next we need jQuery dependency. Now we will create jQuery default object if default parameter was empty or false. Default can register multiple callbacks into callback queues, invoke callback queues, and relay the success or failure state of any synchronous or asynchronous function. Now add send-get-request action.js dependency. We will call the action.js instance directly as function and pass service URL as parameter to it. We are able to utilize done or failure methods because this file returns the main storage current instance. Resolve the deferred in case of successful request, while reject in case of request failure. Pass response object as an argument. Fix the resolve method and pass response object as parameter. Now let's add todo-manager.js file to handle the front-end logic and manage requests. This will reduce complexity on front-end and will keep our code more cleaner. Return the object array. This object will consist of a bunch of functions. Now create function fetch items, which optionally accepts entity ID parameter. If entity ID is undefined, then make it 0. Since there cannot be such ID in database, so it's fine to keep it 0. Now add jQuery dependency. Create jQuery deferred object. Now is the time to add get-todos action.js dependency and specify the object name get-todos action. Specify get-todos action as function and pass entity ID and deferred object as parameters to it. After that, we will resolve the promise object. The done function will be called after resolving the deferred object. Before writing any code, let's test the response on browser console first. Now go ahead and add TodoManager model.js dependency inside the todo component. We will fetch item as soon the todo component is loaded. So call fetch item function using TodoManager object inside initialize method. Now let's continue completing the get controller. Create todo management property. Next, create results.json object from JSON factory. Set JSON data by calling get-todo-items method. Pass customer ID and optionally todo item ID parameters. Ultimately, return the JSON result object. Now let's test the changes we made so far. Before that, let's add some data to todo and task tables. Let's proceed by adding some tasks for this to-do item. Let's now add a task with a complete status. As of now, we have 3 tasks associated with our to-do item. Now open to-do URL. Sign in to the account for which we enter the data. Let's check the response printed on console. We need to modify the response, and additionally, we require task counts as well. So let's fix them by making the necessary modifications within our query. Open to-do management model. And now let's begin modifying the query. First, get the task entity table. Get collection get select instance and reset the selection of columns in SQL query. And then apply custom columns to the query. ID will be an alias of entity ID. Title will be same. No changes in description as well. Then we have a custom column named total_task. We will use a custom query here. Let's see this in a moment. Similarly, completed_tasks. Now format the start date using SQL date format function. Same goes for the end date. Next, create a private method get_task_counter_SQL expression. This method accepts entity name and status parameters. The default value of status is gonna be -1. We will exclude the status filter from our query if it contains this value. Here we are going to create subquery for counter columns. This query will find out total number of tasks against particular to-do item based on provided status value. Count the number of rows from tasks entity where parent ID is equal to the main table, that's a to-do entity ID. Specify the entity table variable. If status value is greater than -1, then concatenate status condition as well. And finally return the SQL expression. The SQL expression should be enclosed within brackets. Now it is time to complete the remaining columns. For total task column, simply call the get_task_counter_SQL expression method by passing the task entity as the only parameter. Duplicate the method for completed task column and provide one for status value parameter. Now open to-do management model.js file. This time we will push new items from the response. Let's first add the necessary dependencies. For the sake of simplicity in the code, let's create the push item method which takes a to-do item as its parameter. Now using item ID, retrieve the item from existing to-dos array. Before that, let's add to-dos observable array dependency. Supply the to-dos array and the object array in second parameter which contains item ID. Ensure the item ID is typecasted to an integer for an exact match. Next, we need to convert item to observable object. Now open to-do component and copy convert to observables function. Return to to-do management interface and paste the copied function here. Remove underscore from function. Substitute the empty object with the convert to observables function call and pass item as its parameter. Now back in to-do component, remove this function. In addition, we will need to update the function calls. First replace the object and then remove underscore from function. Make sure to use TodoManager object. Do same for similar lines of code. Let's reopen the TodoManager model.js file and enhance the push item function with additional logic. If the index is less than 0 or undefined, then this indicates that to-do array is empty. So then we will simply push new item and break further execution. Otherwise, replace the existing to-do item using index and specify observable item. Return the current instance and make the function chainable. Now is the time to apply our logic and utilize the response. Iterate through the response items and start pushing them one by one. Now call self.pushItem and pass response item as an argument. Now open Todo's observable.js file. Remove all items. So we have initially empty observable array. Now let's test the changes. After reloading the page, we can observe that a single item is loaded, retrieved from the database. To confirm this, let's add one more to-do item using phpMyAdmin. Duplicate the item and modify its data. Now let's check the change by reloading the page. The new item is successfully loaded as expected, indicating that we are now ready to proceed to the next step.